we are not alone. And welcome to another episode of Contact TV. And this is a very special time of year for us of the Irish ancestry. This is a big holiday for us. It's Celtic New Year coming up, what many of you viewers know as All Hallows Eve or Halloween. And we are welcoming back actually a gentleman who appeared with us on our first episode of Contact TV when we went to the visual format that we have now.
Yes.
And we are welcoming back our friend Ahonu, and I just want to say a few words about him. Ahonu is an author. He has an amazing book called The Reincarnation of Columbus, which you should all order. And he's also a visionary artist, motivational speaker, spiritual teacher, and radio host of the Honest to God series, who, along with his twin flame wife, Gail Rose, has helped countless people all over the world grow in personal power and self-mastery through their books, their weekly online Akashic Records sessions, their weekly radio shows, and their simple but highly effective 8 Steps to Freedom program. And together, Ahonu and Gail founded Holistic Ireland, the World of Empowerment Organization, and the Spirit of Love Project, and most recently, Twin Flames Publishing. And they have combined over 50 years of metaphysical and psychic experience throughout the United States and Ireland. They are master tarot readers and authorities on Akashic Records and hold certifications in psychic laser therapy. I've got to ask what that is. I don't know what that is. It sounds incredible. Psychic laser therapy, Cathara healing, soul retrieval, Reiki, and cellular repatterning. And Ahonu has also held workshops in manifesting, self-healing, working with homeopathic color remedies, beginner through advanced tarot, visionary art, and much, much more. And he has a wide range of metaphysical ebooks that you can easily acquire through Amazon on Kindle for the Kindle format. And also, please do visit the website, Ahonu, AHONU.com, for more info. And with all of that being said, we are so happy. Speaking to us directly from Oregon, I believe, today,
Yes,
we welcome Ahonu. And how are you doing,
Thank you.
sir? Welcome.
Great. It's great to be back with you again. And, you know, at this time of the year, it's great also to reconnect with what you know about Ireland, because I know what it's like when you're living across the water for so long.
Yes.
And what it's like to reconnect with that ancestry, and it's a beautiful thing. So it only happens at this time of the year for us, but nonetheless, it's just so satisfying, and it's always great to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Ahonu. And of course, we are, very connected, and especially, here in Canada, in our eastern provinces of Newfoundland, and I believe also other parts, PEI perhaps. That's all Ireland, Nova Scotia. That is the same land. That's where the continent was split. So literally, we've got lots of wonderful people of Irish ancestry living on the rock, as we say, in Newfoundland. And there are dialects of Gaelic spoken in Canada that have been literally extinct in Ireland for generations, probably.
Yes, and all of this long before Columbus, too. This is one of the interesting things, and I'm sure we'll get into it, too, as we talk about traditions and stories and that. What gets handed down to us is not often true. We think of the discovery of the Americas by Columbus, and of course my own book, The Reincarnation of Columbus, in lots of ways is not necessarily about Columbus the character, but nonetheless I wrote it because it was an anniversary of the death of my son 500 years to the day after Columbus supposedly discovered America in 1492. So these are all great connections for us to talk about, getting into those old stories and getting into those traditions and those cultures and those belief systems. And of course, a lot of that has morphed into religious beliefs now, as you know.
Indeed it has. Ahonu, would you say that the contemporary way of celebrating Halloween is somehow a derivative of some old aspects of Celtic life, or what happened during Samhain and Beltane?
Yes, yeah. We would pronounce those as Samhain. It's almost like Samhain, Sawin, like Samhain, and we call in America, the other is called Beltane, I think they call it.
Yes,
Yeah, Beltane. It's like kind of an anglicized version. And that we pronounce that as Bealtaine. And that comes from Baal Tina. Tina is fire, and from the pagan god Baal.
Oh,
So
really?
burning the fires.
You mean
So there's all kinds
the
of
Mesopotamian god
yes,
Baal?
Baal. Yeah. But you can see just from that little explanation alone, you can see how corrupt all of this has got. So that now when you talk about Halloween in the United States, for example, I can't speak for Canada, but certainly in the United States, it's all about the $6 billion that people spend on candy.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's the second biggest season after Christmas.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
in terms of commercialization. And like that aspect of Halloween is not what I connect with.
No, it's really new. It's really new.
It is, yeah.
For instance, you know, in my grandparents' time, Halloween, the kids, you know, had some very basic costumes, and they used to have bonfires. That was the big thing.
Yes.
Was the bonfire. There we go. Part of our tradition. And then they would go to people's doors and like throw flour on them, kind of. You can really see it in the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, Vincent Minnelli's wonderful film with Judy Garland. And that they have a whole Halloween sequence that would be very, very typical of how it started, what it was like when it started.
Right. But you know, when you talk about immigration to the United States and Canada, in lots of ways that's also where things got a little changed and corrupt. Because even if you were to just take names, a lot of the names that are traditional, are family names, like, for example, O'Grady, my own last name, and other Irish names were not able to be pronounced by the people in Ellis Island, for example. And so they wrote down the phonetic sounding of it. And that's why a lot of people in the United States have Irish sounding names or Scottish sounding names, but they're having difficulty connecting them back to the original.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
And that's why. But the same thing happens though with the likes of traditions and cultures. I mean, a lot of people would have come from Holland and Belgium and Scotland and Ireland to the likes of New England and Newfoundland and various places like that, and would have brought their traditions with them and cultures with them, but also had to merge them with what was already there, with Native American cultures. And then, of course, in order to be accepted into certain societies, like the predominant Protestantism that was there at that point in time, had to somehow have a festival that was acceptable to all sides. You know, so things changed.
Such killjoys, those Protestants. They don't know how to have a good time. They make you miserable, and they figure out how to make money out of it.
That can be said for a lot of other
That's true.
people and
I
cultures
think that's
too.
what Frank McCourt said, actually. I stole that from Frank McCourt. So.
So there's the whole candy thing, and then there's the whole costume thing. One of my nieces throws an all-night party every Halloween.
Right. All night. Wow.
All night. Yeah. And she has over 100 people, and police regularly go by. Nothing happens. They know about it.
Right.
And that's her take on Halloween. That's the one time of year when she feels she can be someone different.
Well, now, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because, you know, that whole costume thing, and I know, especially in our area here, but I've seen it in other states around the United States where we've lived, it's completely taken out of context. It's completely taken out of its original meaning. And the reason is because a lot of times religions don't like the idea of black magic or of Satanism or not even Satanism, but the dead. They don't like to speak about the dead. And that is so different to the original context. And I'll get to the costumes in a second.
Sure.
But in the original, as you know, that Celtic festival of Samhain was where people wore costumes to ward off the dead. Because at that time of the year, you just have to consider that when we come into the 31st of October and the 1st of November, you're talking about the end of summer and the beginning of winter. So it's likened, it's superimposed upon the human existence, that it's the death of all that was good, and you're now moving into the underworld, and you're moving into darkness, and the sun is gone for another 6 months. So you're into the time of the dead. And it was also the time when the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest. And because of that, you had a lot of people you had the living who were able to communicate with the dead during that period of time, but you also had the dead who were communicating with the living. So there was this crossover that went on, you see.
A thinning of the veil.
Yeah.
The thinning of the veil. And that was also the time when, if somebody was going home in the dark, for example, or after being in the fields or at work or whatever, they would dress up as a ghoul or a ghost, so that the ghouls and the ghost would think that this was one of their own and wouldn't touch them. So that's the origin. That's the origin of the.
That's it, huh? Oh my goodness.
What about Donald Trump lookalikes? What do they get?
Yeah, really.
Don't go there.
He's one of us.
Yeah, right. How about
I know. I know.
Oh
Yeah. So.
Well, that is, that's fascinating, I think, and Ahonu, when you look a little bit at other, of course, as you mentioned, there are many cultures that have a kind of a festival and are aware, I think, of the thinning of the veil. I think it's a real thing that actually is true in that sense. And of course, in Oregon, maybe even you have people celebrating Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, which happens a little bit later, usually a little bit into November, but they dress to mock death. They wear costumes to say, the hell with you, death. You're nothing. They mock death.
In fact, I just heard on the radio this morning a fact that surprised me, and that in North Korea, they actually bring in wooden coffins into their homes and their offices, and for 10 full minutes they lie in the coffin with the lid on, purely to cheat death, or to eliminate the fear of death that they have. And it's done at this time of the year. So it's interesting that, I'd never heard that before, but it's interesting that that same cultural similarity or dealing with death is the same all over the world.
It is. It is indeed. Speaking of funny factoids, I've been waiting to tell this to you all day, and you too, Wes. This was actually in some of my readings, but that pretty much every Christian sect, from the Catholics and the Anglicans and such, have some form of communion. Meaning some bread and some wine. You go down south to the Baptists, and they've got a saltine cracker and some Welch's grape juice. That's what's going on down there. But anyway, that very ceremony, which we as Catholics and Anglicans are always told represents the Last Supper of Christ, has nothing to do with the Last Supper of Christ. There was a very sacred rite to Osiris in ancient Egypt, where the worshippers would come to the priests, and they made these flat wafers that represented body parts of Osiris. And so you would ingest the body part of Osiris, and therefore be carrying part of the god within you. So this idea of almost it's almost a cannibalistic, this idea, it used to always bother me as a kid, that the host transforms into flesh. I don't think they focus on that anymore, but that's the kernel of the idea, and it has nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with the Last Supper. It is a retooled rite of Osiris.
But without getting into religion bashing, and I'm saying this because I'm coming from Holy Catholic Ireland, where I was an altar boy and I was going to be a priest and all of those kinds of things, right? So, I've had it up to here with that religious indoctrination. But you are right when you talk about eating the body of Christ. I mean, how gross is that, even as a concept, to a child? And then I can remember also not only battling with that and trying to deal with it in my head, but also I'd look up on the walls of the church, and you'd see this man hanging on a cross with blood pouring out his palms and blood pouring out from across where a crown of thorns was put on his head, and blood pouring out from his heart. And like, I just thought, this is a place of torture.
It was horrifying, really. You know,
absolutely outrageous.
The Sacred Heart that would be external, you know, that always used to bother me. But you know, this idea that, and I remember way back when, I don't think this is true now, but it was always a mandate that you couldn't chew the host.
I remember.
It had to either dissolve or whatever, because of course it was going to transfigure into a piece of Christ's flesh. So good old Osiris, we can thank.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted to hear that, because I didn't know about that Osiris connection, but certainly it makes sense, because a lot of these things are all handed down through traditions. And we found, coming from Ireland, how a lot of these things were changed on us too. So originally the Celtic festival of Samhain Christianity tried to change it. So Pope Gregory, I think it was, Gregory III, he designated November 1st as All Saints' Day. And the whole idea there was to take the attention off the dead and to try and put it on this Christian idea that, oh, it's all about saints, you know, don't be focusing on the... And there's some merit to that and all. But then, I'm not sure who it was that came along, some Christianity anyway, I think it was in the year 1000 AD, they came along and they designated that the 2nd of November was going to be All Souls' Day, you see, and to take the emphasis off the original evening of All Hallows, which was the connection between the living and the dead, the death of the summertime and the moving into the wintertime, the death of the human body, the connection between the living and the dead, and the thinning of the veils that we talked about earlier. So they want to take the emphasis away from all of that and move it on to this idea of the Christ soul and the All Saints. And you know, it didn't work. It didn't work. It has worked to a degree, but it didn't work in the sense that what they had to do was they had to incorporate a lot of those traditions into the new belief system. We've seen that with the coming of St. Patrick, for example, in 432. A lot of the traditions had to be incorporated into Christianity, because why? They couldn't get rid of them.
No, they couldn't. They couldn't.
They were good.
Poor old St. Patrick, you know, poor old St. Patrick became the poster boy for the Catholic Church 500 years after the poor man was dead. His entire conversion career only involved two communities, and ironically, they were in Northern Ireland. He was a penniless guy. He wasn't the bishop. That was all done, you know, posthumously. You know, so, but... And
I'll give you an idea, too, of the fires, right? The idea, you know, you mentioned bonfires there in the beginning, remember?
Yes.
And the idea of the bonfire, of course, was to light the darkness. I mean, consider that, you know, the days are getting shorter and so on. You're heading into winter, and the bonfire was a symbol of the light. And also, as I mentioned earlier, about Baal and all that. So there's a connection there with fire and the Celtic goddess. But also, interestingly, there's a side-by-side tradition with the Roman Empire, who were also lighting bonfires at the same time. So therefore, when Christianity coming out of Rome, of course, they had to incorporate the fires as part of that as well. But the tradition that I remember, which I thought was amazing, was that everybody put out their own house fires, the fires that they would have had in their homes to keep them warm. They put those fires out on the day of the 31st of October. And the reason they did was because they knew that there would be a community fire being lit in the town square, or, you know, wherever they gathered. So this was a major bonfire symbolizing the light. But because it was a fire that was being dedicated to the thinning of the veils and the honoring of the dead, and the ability to be able to communicate with the dead, and the fact that the dead weren't really gone, they were still there, we could still love them and communicate with them, and all of that. What people did was, they took a light from that central community fire and brought it back to their homes and lit their home fires with that community light.
Oh boy.
So you can see how that then became, their fires in their own home then became an extension of the community, you know. And these are beautiful traditions, and they're not carried on very much to this day, but that's where the origin of the bonfires was. And of course then you had the likes of Guy Fawkes, you know, he carried out that act on the Houses of Parliament.
He was that close.
He was that close. But he did that, you see, at Halloween. And so the English celebrate that aspect of the fires and the fireworks as being what happened to them in their history at this time of the year.
Yes, they're big on that. Do you think at this time now, Ahonu, in this 31st of October, would there be practitioners of indigenous Celtic religions conducting ceremony?
Oh yes, indeed. It's actually been revived, and I find this really interesting because a lot of modern religions and you know the technology age that we're in, people miss a lot of what went on in the culture in those ancient times, and now they're returning to it. And a lot of places like the Hill of Tara, for example, and the Hill of Ishnock, they really come to life again at this time of the year. There's people dressed up as druids and Celts, and oh my God, it's absolutely marvelous. They bring out horses and they decorate, they wear, you know, they dress up in their costumes also, but they're doing it for the reasons of the original intention, not just to, you know, who's going to be the spookiest looking for our competition. Do you know what I mean? It's actually dressed up for the real reasons, those traditional reasons, and then they dance around the bonfire and they protect themselves from evil spirits, and this is all part of that tradition, and it's a wonderful thing, and it is growing again in popularity. It always was popular when I was growing up, but now it seems to be becoming mainstream actually.
Oh, excellent.
Which is great.
Excellent.
I think it's great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And would this also be going on, you know, in Scotland, in Wales, or have they become so Protestantized that that's less common? And also, of course, you know, Cornwall. Those are all Celtic people. The Isle of Man. You know.
That's right.
So is Ireland really the torch holder for the return to the indigenous religion?
You know, I'm not sure about that, and I'm guessing, and I venture to say that it's happening all over. And the reason why I'm venturing to say that is because I think that there is a growth of awareness happening all over the world. And that awareness also is going backward in time as well as forward in time. So I think that people are beginning to embrace a lot of the thinking and the ideas that were there in the past. Not that it's living in the past, but that those people had an awareness of what was going on in the bigger picture that we've lost. And so I think they're bringing a lot of that forward now, and also bringing a lot of potential from the future in terms of the ability of the human mind to be so creative and godlike, that they're starting now to merge that huge potential. And so I'd say that a lot of those traditional cultures, the likes of, you mentioned the Isle of Man, and also in parts of Normandy and in France, you know, they would have had a Celtic origin to them.
Absolutely.
And I'd say that they're also embracing these Celtic festivals in a bigger way.
Indeed. Well, there were Alpine Celts. There were Celts. Our people maybe originally came from Eastern Europe. In fact, you know, I know Wes has a question here, but I did want to talk to you in a minute about the Tuatha De Danann in just a moment.
Oh, fine.
Carry on.
So I want to ask you, which is a segue into one of the services you and your partner, your twin flame, offer. I have done tarot readings over the years, and I have 2 decks behind me there. Do you and your partner do a specific reading around this time? Because a lot of people I know do a reading that coincides with special festivals or events in their lives. Do you folks do that?
No, but I'm going to answer you with something that is going to be a great help to you. And that is that at this time of the year, you know, we mentioned about the tinning of the veils.
Yeah.
So traditionally, a lot of shamanistic type people, matchmakers especially, but those also who would do predictive readings, especially at this time of the year. And the reason was because they could access this part of consciousness where the veil was thin. So in terms of tarot reading, of course, the church outlawed all that, and they demonized tarot and all of that. That was the work of the devil and so. But really, what the tarot card was a stimulant to accessing intuition. It was a method of accessing parts of their awareness that they wouldn't normally access. And so that's where that tradition comes from. But to answer your question about us, what we do, Angel Rose spent, 15, 20 years reading tarot, but now she has a book out called Beginning Tarot. You can find it on Amazon.
That's partly why I'm asking.
Beginning Tarot, and look for Angel Rose. Let me spell it because it's an awkward spelling. It's the Irish word for angel, but it's spelled Aingeal. Aingeal, Rose, Angel Rose. And you'll find that book on Amazon, and it's great. And but it's great because she's been coming at it from, in a sense, a slightly different perspective ever since she was able to, since she learned to read the Akashic Records. And the Akashic Records, of course, as you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers would know, it's that veil of knowledge and information that's everywhere. And it in lots of ways, it comes also from the Vedic tradition too, because it's mentioned a lot of times in that tradition. But when she does a tarot reading now, which is not so often, she's drawing from that additional space of consciousness, you see. So she now prefers to do a full Akashic record reading as opposed to a tarot reading, because in some ways she feels that the tarot is, it's not that it's limited, but that it's connected with using these prompts as cards, as prompts, as ideas. Do you understand? Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. That helps flesh it out. Because I don't use the tarot to do readings. I study the symbols.
Right. The symbology is fantastic. Now, that's really where there's a huge amount of potential for people who are looking for health diagnosis for themselves, or for looking at ideas, or even in business. Actually, we're finding more and more people are starting to use it in business to make business decisions, and that's really interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is, and I know that of course, there are a number of different tarot decks, certainly, because this arcane information had to be hidden for a long time.
Yes.
But it's my understanding that the original tarot, or the Book of Thoth, is again coming from ancient Egypt, coming from Thoth, and that these are, the images on the cards, the greater arcana, the lesser arcana, are archetypes, really, and it's almost like we're talking about a Jungian thing here, where these are images that all humanoids can sort of resonate with, and it opens things up to them in a way that doesn't scare them. I think there's something that you can get a person to have a tarot reading a lot more easily than I can get them to have a hypnosis session.
Right, and I can see why that would be. Isn't it a strange thing? But there's a friend of ours who was passing through London airport. It was probably about a year ago now. But she had a tarot deck in her baggage, and they took it away from her.
What?
The authorities, they took it away from her for some bizarre reason, saying that was something to do with the occult and was, the work of the devil, and
barbarically crazy.
Those bloody Anglicans! What next? What next?
I've never heard of such a thing.
That's incredible.
Now, I wouldn't have believed it. If it hadn't been a good friend of ours who was completely trustworthy, and it happened to her.
Oh,
I was astonished.
I believe
Where were they seized?
Heathrow, or the other one?
No, it was
the other. The other airport, not Heathrow, but the other one.
Gatwick? No.
Gatwick.
They seized them at Gatwick.
They took
Considering
her
the
tarot
whole
deck.
tradition over there.
It must have been a slow day at Gatwick. That's
Must have been. Maybe they wanted a tarot reading and she wouldn't give it to them or something.
Oh my gosh, that's bizarre.
From the Broadway musical, A Slow Day at Gatwick.
Yeah.
So, Ahonu, now let us talk for a moment about the Tuatha De Danann, which I believe means the sons of the goddess Danann, and how does that ancient pantheon, and we touched on this a little bit, the ancient pantheon of Irish gods, which I know includes the god Lu, and you mentioned Baal, which the Phoenician god, which was astonishing, and the other pantheons, the Norse, the Greek, the Native American, the Canadian ancient peoples. Do you think that all of the tales of these evolved godlike beings are based on the same extraterrestrial or angelic visitors?
Well, I do. And, you know, doesn't that lend itself so beautifully into your contact program? I think it's all fantastic. I think it's all so fabulous. But you are right. And this is one of the things that I like about the returning of these traditions, like I mentioned earlier. A lot of people don't realize how far back they go. And I do believe they go back all the way. And when I say all the way to the seeding of this planet. And there's very good reasons for it. So when you mentioned about Mesopotamia earlier on and the Sumerians, I think that a lot of these traditions come from as far back as that, because that was where, in a way, you know, when you hear things like the Bible saying you spread your seed all over the earth or whatever, that kind of thing, I do believe that that is where a lot of the earth got seeded from and populated from. So when you mentioned the Tuatha De Danann, Tuatha means country or land, and De Danann is of Danu, of the goddess Danu. So this was them bringing their traditions from perhaps Sumeria or wherever. But I think it did originate in that part of the world and became the Celts as they moved and migrated across for various reasons, for weather reasons, for food, for farming their animals, whatever the reasons they were migrating, and eventually arrived in Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man and Ireland and parts of the north of France, you know, forming what became known as the Celtic tradition, the Celtic race. And then out of that came these festivals like Samhain and Beltane and the various other cross-border festivals that they have. All of those traditions were there honoring those gods, honoring those original festivals at these particular times of the year. Because I think a lot of those times of the year were not just where the veils were thin, but they were also where it facilitated this communication back to those extraterrestrial gods, or perhaps even facilitated the landing on Earth, in much the same way as you might have Cape Canaveral. They can only take off from Cape Canaveral at certain times of the year under certain conditions, you know, or else they might have to move to a different place because there's a different environment, so they can land their spacecraft a lot easier. So I do agree with you. I do think that Pantheon is very much the same in all those traditions, of course with the names changed. But I think it's great to think. I find a certain reassurance about that it's not just some makey-uppy kind of cultural story that we're attaching to. You know, it's not a mythology that we're connecting to and saying, oh, that sounds like a nice story, you know, maybe I'll tell it to my kids. No, this is actually something that is going back to the origins of humankind. So when we partake in a festival like Samhain, Halloween, we're celebrating something that's going back to our origins, back to the very beginnings of humankind on this planet. And I like that. I find that reassuring, actually. Yeah, I do.
Continuity. It's a wonderful continuity. And you know, it might interest you, Ahonu, to know that you know, the oldest blood type on Earth is O negative. Negative Rh, O negative is they know that is ground zero for blood types. They know when the other ones split off or came in. Amazingly, they know these things. But people of Irish descent carry a very high percentage of the O negative grouping, way above what is normal. And I mean, it's commonly found in only 3.5% of the world's population. And also 90% of the Basque people, who are quite interesting, and of course red-headed and blue-eyed, they must be related to us. 90% of them have O negative blood. Plus they have a language like Gaelic that is comprised with a lot of Sanskrit. There's a lot of Sanskrit in it, as there is in Gaelic.
Now, isn't that interesting? Yes, I've known that growing up. that the Irish language, Gaelic, its only origin is Sanskrit. Whereas a lot of the other Latin languages they're descended from something else. In other words, is what I'm saying. Whereas the Gaelic comes originally from Sanskrit. Now that's very interesting. But there's other things you're saying about the red hair, and of course, isn't it interesting that a lot of the mummies found in Egypt all had red hair? You know,
Yes.
I mean.
Yes. Well, you know, that's just, Ahonu, you know what has just happened. And of course, all the Egyptian archaeologists have their, they have their burkas in a knot, because what has been discovered after, elaborate DNA testing is that the Old Kingdom pharaohs, of which, King Tutankhamun would have been one of them, are not Egyptian. They are carrying European, Proto-European DNA markers, which would be closer to like Eastern Europeans than to Egyptians. Yes. And this absolutely flies in the face of course, those guys like Dr. Hawass who say that, yes, the Egyptians built the pyramids by rolling everything on logs, and they did it all themselves. Party line. He's got the party line. But indeed now, through DNA, we now know that the pharaohs, the people who were put into kingship, were put there. They were not.
But I have a couple of things to say about that. And you mentioned about Zahi Hawass, and I've never had any affinity with him because I knew from the very beginning that he didn't know what he was talking about. Now, why am I saying that? And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm actually I'm gone past being shocked at this stage at how grown men and women, supposedly educated, can come out with this nonsense to keep us uneducated, to keep us stupid.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by how somebody can continue that old line and not be willing to look at any other possibility. Like, how can somebody be educated or be an adult and not be willing to look at some other side, the other side of the coin, some other possibility? Yeah, I know. And therefore, when somebody is willing to open up, and interesting, we're talking about opening up at this time of the year too, because that's what happens with the thinning of the veils. We open up to other ideas, other possibilities, that we can transcend the worlds, that we can pass between the veils, and that we have access to all this knowledge, instead of the party line that says, hey, you small thing, you do what I say, and when I say jump, you ask how high. And I think that a lot of places around the world, when we do see this kind of revolt and that's happening, I think in some ways it's an expression of that says, I want to know more. I want to find out more. I don't want to continue to believe in the limited way that I have been believing up until now. It has suited me. It has been perfect up to now. But I do feel that there's something more. There is something more. And that's what a lot of these ancient peoples had. They had something more. So I'm going to just bring this full circle for a second, because you did ask me about the two-headed Anon.
Yes.
And I did say that I do believe that they were our ancestors, perhaps from other star systems. And I'm not surprised, because when you say the children of Danu, or the people of Danu, or from the land of Danu, you are talking about an ancient goddess.
Yes.
Which, and when you think of goddess, you are talking about somebody from somewhere else that was revered as a god with superpowers. Now, the two-headed Anon were also superseded or defeated by the Firbulg. And the Firbulg, Fir is the Irish for man, and Bulg means big or huge. So these were giants. And that's also where you have that place in the north of Ireland called Giant's Causeway. Now, it is a natural formation in the sense of it's volcanic rock, octagonal-shaped volcanic rocks. But there's a footprint there in the rock of a giant.
Yes.
And not only that, but a lot of the stories that we get, and I mentioned about mythology, I believe most mythology is actually true, but we've just, Christianity and various other religions have kind of forced it out to be just storytelling, just nonsense. But in that mythology of the Giant's Causeway, you do have giants stepping across from Northern Ireland into Scotland. Now, how were they able to do that? I think it's 32 miles across. But if you're a giant, that's not going to be any problem to you.
Yeah.
Like you're probably just, you may not even be wading. It might be up to your ankles, and you're just stepping across the causeway. You know, so it's called Giant's Causeway, and I do believe there's a lot to be said for that. So those giants were, I think, extraterrestrials. And yeah.
Indeed, Ahonu. In fact, you know, the United States, and particularly the American Midwest, is full of burial middens with giant skeletons in them.
Yes.
Now, there was a great scandal because one of these great mounds was some archaeologists from the Smithsonian came around in the 20s, I believe, or 1930s, and they excavated one of these great mounds, in fact, many of them, and the skeletal remains flew so much in the face of the standard, you know, party line, again, about Darwinian evolution, that
yes.
Our own institution burned those skeletons and tried to hide it for almost a complete century. There was a deathbed confession from one of these archaeologists who worked for the Smithsonian a couple of years ago, and he described what happened. But there are many middens that are untouched. That and now we can go in with LiDAR. There have all, you know, ways of examining these things. But there were giant humanoids in North America, certainly, without a doubt. I believe they were pretty much even the Bible doesn't, it's the Cliff's Notes of what happened, but, you know, there was Goliath, right? They talk about him.
Yes, indeed.
Also, we have many contemporary or somewhat contemporary writers, that's go back to Poe or H.P. Lovecraft, that mask these things in fantasy to avoid persecution. But they're telling the truth. They're transmitting the truth.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And if you... Go ahead, Ahonu. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because when you mentioned Poe, you sparked a little thread for me to tell you about. And if you don't mind, I'll just pop back to Halloween again with this, because when we talked earlier about the Romans, there's a Roman god called Pomodo, I think it is, Pomodo, and she was the goddess of fruit trees, and especially apples, which was where we get the Italian pomodoro. You see, the apple, right? But how that's connected to Halloween is because that goddess was one that was brought forward into the Celtic tradition through the Roman Empire, the Roman Empire, crossing through Europe and into Britain at the time. And what they used to do was, that was to bless the apples, of course, at this time of the year, the season of apples, you know, the fall, right? So then how it got connected with Halloween was interesting, because with this thinning of the veils that we talked about earlier, a lot of these seers and matchmakers would use the apples as a means to find a husband or a wife for somebody. And how they used to do it was, if, for example, you put somebody's name on an apple, right, and you immersed it in water, and of course they're all mixed, there's maybe a lot of apples, you know, the game that we play at Halloween,
bobbing for apples.
And bobbing for apples, and you try and go in, you try and catch hold of one of them with your mouth, whichever one you caught, if that had the guy's name on it, well, you were to be married to that person before the next Halloween came round.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's how the apple came to be celebrated in the Roman Empire tradition, as well as in that ancient Celtic tradition of Samhain. That's where the apple.
My goodness!
That
Isn't
ties
that
it together,
something?
right?
Isn't that something? Yeah. Well, you know, the Romans were always great at co-opting this and co-opting that. I mean, there is a shrine, an underground spring in Bath, in England, which was rededicated to a Roman goddess, but it was originally a Celtic place of worship. And they just simply combined the two goddesses and just, you know, went on a little cross-marketing, rebranding. They didn't care.
Opportunists.
Right.
Yeah, it was better to just embrace this.
Nothing has changed, Wes.
Nothing has changed.
No.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
Marketing.
Oh, my God.
But, you know, I know you do have to go, but let me tell you a quick story before we go. And that is about the pumpkin. And I know a lot of people often wonder, and they've asked me too, like, where does the pumpkin fit in with Halloween? And what's that to do with traditions and so on? And that is a later addition to the whole Halloween thing. And where that came from was because a guy by the name of Jack was going home. Did you ever hear this story?
No, Jack we know. The Jack part we know.
We know the Jack. Okay.
The Jack-o'-lantern.
Yes.
So what happened was, Jack, he was coming home one night, and he met the devil, the Prince of Darkness. And of course it was the 31st of October.
What else?
And he met the Prince of Darkness by a tree. And how Jack got away from him was he convinced the devil to go up a tree for whatever reason. How he did it, I don't know, but he convinced the devil to go up a tree. And as soon as the devil was up the tree, Jack scribed the sign of the cross on the trunk of the tree, so the devil couldn't get down.
Oh, I like that.
Now, you can see where this was obviously introduced at the time of Christianity, right? But let's go with it for a moment. So the devil is stuck up the tree, right? And Jack is free to go on his way. But the devil kept haunting him, saying, look, I'll make a deal with you, right? I'll make a deal with you. And the deal was that Jack would let him down from the tree if the devil promised never to take his soul, right? So sure enough, they made that deal. And with that, you see, Jack reckoned that he could go off and do what he liked, because he knew that the devil would never take his soul. So off he went, and he lived the high life. He acted like a jerk all his life, he did everything knowing the devil would never take it. So anyway, at the time of his death, of course, when he died, Jack wasn't allowed to go into heaven. So he returned to his old friend, the devil, because that was his only alternative. And he said, hey, Satan, you know what? Can you help me out here? We had a deal, right? And what the devil did was he hurled a piece of coal at him from hell, a fiery piece of coal. He hurled it at him. And Jack caught the coal and put it into a lantern, put it into a hollowed out pumpkin. He put it into a hollowed out pumpkin so that he could carry it around to light his way, because he was lost he was neither in heaven nor in hell. He was lost because the devil couldn't claim him, and he wasn't. So in that purgatory place, or that limbo place, as it used to be, he would go around carrying this jack-o'-lantern.
Oh my God! That's where that comes from.
That's where that story.
That's fabulous.
That's a good one. That is a good one.
There's just one other final little story, because there's another side to that story, or another way that story came about, and that was that if you were going out on the night of Halloween, there was a danger that your soul would be taken. You see, so if somebody had a pumpkin that was hollowed out with a candle inside it, the candle represented the soul of a living person that had been captured.
Wow. Wow.
That's why the ghouls. Yeah, that's why the ghouls are always carrying the lantern pumpkin.
Well, there you go.
You see?
Now, before we wrap, Ahonu, I know that you and your twin flame offer many, many services, so perhaps you can take time to tell us about them.
Oh boy. Well, we do, and we're starting to publish a lot of things for ourselves and for other people. We're just in the process right now of publishing a book called A Year Without Food, and we're publishing this for a gentleman from Israel who is one of very few breatharians that we know in the world, and it's a fascinating subject. And not only do we get to publish it, because we're editing and proofreading it and all sorts, so we've read it like 20 times. So this is a subject that's really fascinating and starting to grow and grabbing public interest, because heretofore people have said that's a medical impossibility. Well, he has proven that it's not. And so that's one of the services that we're offering, is publishing. And we're also publishing a lot of our own books, as I mentioned. And we have written 100 books of answers from the Akashic Records. We've only got 13 published so far. We are in the process slowly rolling out publishing the others, but that is an amazing collection of questions and answers that people have asked us over the years about Akashic Records, and they're usually kind of global questions: what's happening to the world, or are aliens real, or whatever. They're not personal questions, in other words, is what I'm saying. They're not questions like, when am I going to meet my soulmate? And speaking of soulmates, that's another thing we're doing. We are this next week rolling out a course on soulmates, and after we finish that course, we're going to go into twin flames. And both these courses address how to find your twin flame, how to tell if you're married to a soulmate or a twin flame, how to tell the difference between them, and all kinds of other benefits as well. And there's a lot of giveaways that we're giving as part of that. And so that's their courses. So we're doing the publishing, we're doing the books, we're doing courses. And another thing that we're doing lately, when you mentioned Halloween, and it sparked me to mention it to you, is a manifesting tree, because a lot of people use this time of the year, not only with reading tarot cards, but also for manifesting, because the veils are thin. So we've created, Angel Rose actually is her idea, and I thought it was fantastic, so I jumped right in on it, is to create a series of manifesting trees that people can use to manifest their own desires. So they can use these trees to, meet the love of their life for relationships, build their business. And we've actually used it in a corporation already, where they're already manifesting some amazing results, I mean. And how it's used is very simple. It's just an image of a tree, but it's got the roots in it, because the roots are what gets the nourishment out of earth. So if you fill in the roots with what you want your new roots to be. In other words, if it's a relationship, then it's going to be deep love, deep connection, sense of oneness, combined likes and desires, all that kind of thing. And that manifests into the tree, because an apple tree can only bear apples. So when it manifests into the leaves and into the fruit, that's where you put your manifested output. So that might be, like in the case of a business, let's say, that would be the services that you offer. The fruits of my tree are the services and the products that I offer. And we've seen this work like magic, absolutely amazing for people personally and in the business world. So that's another thing we're doing, is the manifesting tree. So if somebody was to connect with us on our website, angelroseandahonu.com, or even just my own Ahonu at my ahonu.com, ahonu.com, you will find details about that. And we will be doing more of that as time goes on, because what we're finding is people are saying, well, can you do us a special manifesting tree for relationships? Can you do a special manifesting tree for me getting a car, or getting a new job, or multiple different purposes and reasons? And that's also very exciting. And let me think, there's lots more. Oh my God, we've got so much. We've got so much going on.
And Ahonu, are you still doing those wonderful healing? You're creating crests, family crests, and healing the family lines on other sides, on both sides, or if there are two sides involved. But you're healing and creating family crests.
I am. Now let me tell you a little bit about that, because that's an amazing project. Several years ago, I did a family crest for a woman, and the reason is because, no, actually, let me go back a little bit further. Where it happened was, when Angel Rose and I were getting married, my family crest, the O'Grady family crest, coming from Ireland, had a Latin inscription on it, as most family crests do. And my one said, vulneratus non victus. And what that means in Latin, it means fallen but not defeated. And she said to me, hey, I don't want to be fallen but not defeated. I don't want to buy into that stuff, right? And I began thinking, oh my God, you are absolutely right, because when you get married, you take on the collective karma of that family tradition, that family ancestry, you see? And she got me thinking, and I'm saying, well, how can I change that? If I'm coming from a tradition of having fallen but I'm not defeated. Like, you know, I'm struggling somehow. I'm down and people are kicking me, but I'm still not dead. Do you know what I mean? I'm saying, how do I get out of that? And what I realized was I'm going to have to go back and find what my original family crest looked like before any distortion, before any, yeah. And so, you know, thankfully, with our gifts, I was able to go back and tune into this, what our family name looked like before any wars, battles, any of that. And I created a new family crest. And since then, my God, bingo, it was almost like clockwork. It was like magic. Speaking of magic and Halloween, I was uncovering relations that we had in distant parts of Canada, distant relations that we never heard of, coming out of the woodwork, business opportunities happening, you know, things, because I had changed the dynamic of what that family name was bringing forward. And so I met this woman. She said, I want one of those. Her life changed. You should have seen her 3 weeks afterwards. Changed woman, different demeanor, more self-esteem, reconnecting with her children that she had never connected with or had lost connection with for a long time. And countless stories like that I could tell you. But here's what I'm going to do for you guys, and you're just sparking me to do this now. If somebody connects to me and mentions your show, you know, that they heard or saw this show, I will give them like a big discount. I mean a big discount. These things are normally $495 because it takes me more than a week and sometimes 10 days to actually arrive at the finished family crest. And I will do that for your people, only your people, for $295.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's like,
get the word out. We will get the word out.
We'll put that up on our Facebook
I will.
page and such. So we'll get the word
Right.
out on
Wow,
that.
that's very generous.
Wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow, this is the ideal interview, isn't it?
Indeed it is. Ahonu, thank you so much for joining
You're very
us
welcome.
today and talking about Ireland and mysticism. And I look forward to one of these days when I'm up at Newgrange with yourself and Anne Gale and perhaps my sister and my brother-in-law Kevin and his brother, the mushroom lover Martin, and all
that
of
would be fantastic.
and all of us, and we can really feel the vibes. I'm of the belief system that those places are actually like portals, that there are
Yes, they are.
reasons for those constructions.
They are.
And I think
Yes.
that there was some type of incredible spiritual events that happened there in the past. They aren't simply burial spots. I think that's later.
right.
I feel that that's later. Would that be accurate, maybe?
I agree with you completely, because one of the times when we were at Newgrange and Angel Rose does this, when you speak about the Akashic Records, she actually can go into the Akashic Records of a place. So there we were at Newgrange, and she goes into the Akashic Records of this place, and at the same time, I'm looking at it like with psychic eyes, as it were, and I could see this plume of energy coming out the top of Newgrange, and I actually painted a picture of it. So you could see this plume of energy, and I thought this was really strange, because in lots of ways we had been brought up to believe that this was a dead place. It was something that was used as a burial chamber thousands of years ago, right? But no, these places are built on ley lines that are still connecting the energy to this day. And out of the, so then I went and I looked. You may or not know, but I lived in Egypt for a number of years, over 3 years, and worked in and out of it for 6 years. But I went and I connected with the pyramids, and I could actually see that same energy coming out of the tops of the pyramids.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were hooked
So
up to that
these-
energy system.
So these sacred places, these sacred mounds, these stone circles, all of these things are connected all around the world through the sacred grid lines. And I do think that there's a kind of a, when we talked about those festivals being reactivated, you know, and the people going to the Hill of Tara and those druid ceremonies and all that, that's part of that reactivation. That's part of this growth of awareness. That's part of this reconnecting with our higher selves, with an aspect of us that can cross the veil. And I think that is a beautiful development.
So we're fortunate to all be here right now, aren't we?
We are. This is a very,
indeed,
we all chose
yeah.
to come into the physical plane to help others with the great transition, the great upgrade. And
That's right.
Is it about time? Oh, we could go on. Well,
I know.
Every blessing to you and Anne Gale for a totally lovely Samhain and everything else that you're doing. We really appreciate you speaking with us today, and always a joy.
Yes.
And thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay,
It's been a
Ahonu.
divine pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Blessings
now.
and thank you.
Again.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
And the people going to the Hill of Tara and those druid ceremonies and all that, that's part of that reactivation. That's part of this growth of awareness. That's part of this reconnecting with our higher selves, with an aspect of us that can cross the veil. And I think that is a beautiful development.
So we're
it's
fortunate to all be here right now, aren't we?
We
Yes.
are. This is a
Yes,
very.
indeed,
We
yeah.
all chose
Yeah.
to come into the physical plane to help others with the great transition, the great upgrade. And
That's right.
is it about time? Oh,
Yeah.
we could go on. Well,
I know.
every blessing to you and Ann Gale for a totally lovely Samhain and everything else that you're doing. We really appreciate you speaking with us today, and
Yes.
always a joy.
Yes. Thank
And
you.
thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's been a divine pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Blessings
now.
and thank you.
Again.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.